Welcome,
Thank you. Thank
I'm sure you are a great addition to the Catholic Church, Avery.
you. I hope so.
We need beautiful people that came in for a reason, and because they listened to their heart. And I think that's the bridge these young people that we're meeting, Avery. You know, the man's heart, men and women, man's heart was made for the truth. Avery Lane is a writer, Catholic convert. He's part of the Anglophone edition of Hosanna, a social prayer network that lets Catholics create or join online prayer communities. Their mission is to unite Catholics in prayer around the world through the internet. Avery, welcome. Great to have you.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, you're welcome. You wrote an article in the Catholic Exchange that caught my eye. Mexico's child martyr inspires bravery and faith. And because of our work here at the John Paul II Renewal Center and our work specifically with young people, it really caught my eye, that article. We, against all odds, Avery, we are finding young people, especially young men, coming into the faith, or at least looking at the faith, and growing up in perhaps the most toxic culture in our history in many ways. And despite all those odds, there's something in the human heart that gives a man and a woman too, of course, this hope for something more than they could find in the world. In fact, the Claymore sword is behind me here. The Claymore sword was made famous by William Wallace in Braveheart. It was the Scots had brought it in. And anyways, Claymore is our logo for Claymore Militis Christi, which means soldiers for Christ. It's our apostolate to journey with young men as they seek the truth. So your story, and we're excited to hear more about Joselito, the child martyr of the Cristeros War. And this young martyr was declared venerable by St. John Paul II, beatified by Pope Benedict XVI, and canonized by Pope Francis. So Avery, tell us a little bit about yourself. What prompted you to write this story? I want to hear a little bit about that background you have going there. And of course, the story itself, brother. So, hey, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk about a saint that I really have connected to ever since, or actually before I became a Catholic. And when I hear you talking about that toxic culture and that thing that's
Mm.
within us that is hungering and knowing that there's something else, that there's something better. I was a good lapsed Methodist and a card-carrying member of the secular left, and I
Mm.
knew that something was wrong, something was missing. I was existing in an echo chamber of negativity and just a culture of death, as St. John Paul II called it.
Yes, you were. How old were you approximately? This is probably over a period of time, but approximately.
Sure. I would say that I was in my 40s when I really began to feel that I was missing something.
Mm.
I had been introduced to a lot of great Catholic writers when I was younger, Flannery O'Connor, Graham Greene, all those the literary ones, and I had felt a kind of pull to Catholicism. Was always sort of like, no, I'm not going to go there. That's very strange. I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains. There aren't a lot of Catholics. Certainly when I was growing up, there weren't. Historically, there were not. And so it took me a long time to really begin to realize that those things that I were missing were in the church. And I was spending a lot of time in Mexico. I loved Mexico. Being in a culture where you are constantly reminded the bells are ringing and there are, altars up and along the streets. There are all these opportunities to be engaged, that you're not just in a world that's sort of here and now, but there's an infinite world, the kingdom of God that's out there
Mm.
that you're constantly being drawn to. And I was in a church in a beach town and I saw a picture of a young saint. I didn't know it was a saint. I was like, what? It looks like kind of like maybe a youth group advertisement, or maybe it's he looked like he could be alive today. He was wearing jeans, a button-down white shirt. And I saw him in a church. I saw him in another church a couple years later. I saw him in another church. In the meantime, I had
And
gone
these were Catholic churches.
Catholic
Uh-huh.
churches, and there'd be a picture, a poster on the wall. In the meantime, I'd gone to the Basilica of Our Virgin of Guadalupe, and I had gone as a secular humanist. I had gone to pick up some plastic souvenirs to take back, kind of ironically, to my friends.
And
And
we
I,
we have a little picture of her behind me here,
indeed,
right?
indeed,
Yes.
yes, she's right behind me here too.
Beautiful. Glory to
But
God.
I went and I didn't know anything. I got there like on December 11th, so it was a madhouse. And I got on the moving sidewalk and I went through once and I'm like, huh, that's fake. And I went through a second time. I don't know why I went through the second time. And I heard a voice in my head so clearly and so powerfully. What if that's not a fake? What if it's real? And that floored me because
Oh.
I couldn't prove it was a fake. That's my own arrogance, my own sort of sense that human beings are the only thing that matter, that were telling me that it was a fake. And so I began to do research, to question. And during COVID, I realized that I needed something and I needed it now. And the church embraced me with open arms. And I've been so different and happy and thrilled to be a part of it.
Well, God bless you. Welcome, welcome,
Thank you.
and
Thank
I'm sure you are a great addition to the Catholic Church, Avery.
you. I hope so.
We need beautiful people that came in for a reason, and because they listened to their heart. And I think that's the bridge these young people that we're meeting, Avery. You know, the man's heart, men and women, man's heart was made for the truth. And we have so much noise. When I say the toxic culture these young people are growing up in, so much of it is noise, right? With the phones and social media, that we very seldom get a chance to listen to our hearts. And as I read your story, I thought, wow, this inspiration comes down to us, doesn't it? These stories. And so this picture, and in fact, I'll definitely link your article in the show notes. And in there, there's a link to this picture, and it's really something to see. It's really a powerful story. And this picture then is in many of the Catholic churches, then, right, in Mexico.
Definitely. And when I converted, I began to look at it more closely. I still didn't know who this person was, but I noticed that he had a palm frond, a symbol of martyrdom, and he had a rosary. And then I noticed that he was his barefoot. He was standing in his bare feet, and there was blood around his feet, and there was broken glass on the on. I went from being like, "What's this sort of like charming picture of a young teenager, leading their youth group to victory? What's really there when you see that here's a kid, 13-year-old, who's a martyr in a culture that we think is so intertwined with Catholicism. And as I began to find out who he was and what the Cristero's War was, about the madness that descended on Mexico, and I really began to think about, it's happening in Nicaragua right now, and it's happening all over the world. And it
Yes,
can
it is.
happen in places that we think that it won't happen. And if it can happen in places that we think it won't happen, it can most definitely happen here.
Before you get into the story, that's a great setup because we see it in the UK, Avery. We see it in Western civilization, Western Europe. It's amazing that they're putting people in jail now for tweets, and for praying at across from abortion clinics. You can't make this up the way they're clamping down. I think, Avery, we would have saw this in the United States if we didn't get a new administration, and we still may, because the undercurrents of this are all over. So you're exactly right. So let's talk about this. If you could take us into this story, knowing that this story, just like you said, can be any of our stories very quickly. There are more martyrs in the 20th and 21st century than there have been throughout history. It's a lot of Christian martyrs today. So yeah, let's talk to the young. Now, when I say the young people listening, these are young adults for most cases, and again, all the people that love them, their parents, their grandparents, this is a big community out here, and this story will go not only across the nation, but it will go into many countries that this podcast goes into. But I want you to address those young people too, because they're feeling inspired, and this is exactly what Joselito was feeling, huh?
Yeah, it was a really traumatic time in Mexico, a violent time in sort of the early years of the 20th century. There was a revolution to overthrow the Porfirio Diaz dictatorship. Like so many revolutions and wars, allies come together who are, not don't share the same philosophies and the same thoughts,
Mm.
other than that they are opposed to the same enemy. And so there were liberals and conservatives, there were Catholics and atheists, all working for independence. When independence finally came, there was a civil war because there was a war about what Mexico would be, what the country would be. And this is a country with a long, bloody history. We look back to the pre-conquest days and just the history of war and violence. So when the revolution turned into a civil war, ultimately the secular humanists won, the liberals won, and they created a constitution that was very, very against the Catholic Church. And then there were these Calles laws that were put into place by a president from the Revolutionary Party, and these laws sought to wipe out the church, to seize church property, to forbid mass from being said. It depended from state to state how severely they were imposed,
Mm.
but they were absolutely determined to prevent and to stop the influence of the Catholic Church in that most wonderful Catholic country.
I
Ultimately,
was I was gonna just say is this, I don't want to break into your story too much, but is this just these governments, is this, more of an evil, or is it more, are these people just seeking power, or both? Or, they're atheists obviously, and in their minds, do you think that they what's behind this? And we see this so often. It's a spiritual warfare, of course. But is that the way they were looking at it, you think, or is it just for control somehow?
I think it's control, I think it's power, and ultimately, I think it's fear. Because the gospel of Jesus Christ is radical.
Mm.
It is truly, truly radical. And it calls the world to operate in a completely different
Mm.
way than we want to operate, than we really want to run governments. And so the moral authority of the church is a threat to power. It's a threat to comfort. It's a threat to security. And I think that's why the
Mm.
state places itself as God, and it can't tolerate another God. It can't tolerate a higher power that calls it to its better self.
Yeah. So in Mexico, and it happened very quickly then, didn't it?
It,
Relatively quickly. And so we're being taken over by the secularists. They're really persecuting the church. I mean, reminder of like the French Revolution. I mean, it's just bloody, right?
yeah,
Brutal.
yeah.
And then something happens, huh? This group, the Cristeros, start to stand up. It's amazing. I'm going to be quiet and let you tell your story because it's really beautiful. Yeah.
They are absolutely remarkable, the Cristeros. They're a group of Catholics who are like, we won't take this any longer. This is not our country. This is something that we think is evil and has to be stopped.
Mm.
And so they began to fight back, and a war broke out. And it broke out mainly in those states that are like Michoacan, and I'm going to mispronounce some of these states terribly, Jalisco, sort of on the northwestern, central western side. There was in Michoacan a young man named Luis Sanchez del Rio, Jose Sanchez del Rio, who was just a kid. His older brothers joined the Cristeros. They went to fight, and he said to his mom, "Hey, mom, I want to go. I want to go with my brothers. I want to fight." And she said, "No way." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to ask the general here in our town, the one who's in charge here in our town." And the guy said, "No, no, you're too young. You can't do it." And he said, "I believe so strongly. I don't care if I'm too young. I want to be part of this." So he went to a neighboring town and he met the general. And the general said, "You're too young." But he was so impressed by Joselito is a sort of a nickname, right?
Mm.
Little Jose. Joselito's incredible commitment and his deep faith that he said, "You know what? You can be the flag bearer. You can be the flag bearer of our troop. And so Joselito embraced that. He was a wonderful sort of emblem and a flag bearer for the troop in a battle that broke out, which was quite severe. The government forces were winning. They shot the horse of the general, and Joselito saw that the general was in enormous danger. And so he got off his own horse and offered it to the general. And the general was able to escape to fight another day. Jose was captured along with several other of the Cristero soldiers. He was taken to prison and he was tortured. They thought that it would be an enormous boon to their cause if they could get Joselito to reject Christ, to reject his faith, and to stand in absolute opposition to the church. Joselito would have none of it. He was so determined. He prayed the rosary constantly. He was encouraging of those who were in prison with him. He wrote to his mother and said, I think I'm going to die at this moment, but that does not matter, mother. Resign yourself to the will of God. I am dying very happy because I am dying on the line next to our God.
Man.
And he
There's
was
something that happens, Avery, isn't it? You know, I think as men, don't we all put ourselves in a situation like that and wonder if we would have the courage for that, don't we?
completely, yeah.
And I think if I was going to have the courage, and we may, but it's going to come from Christ. I mean, you know that what they did to him was brutal, and you see this all the time when they're torturing martyrs. It's really a brutality, really a demonic brutality that comes out. You can hardly believe that men could do this to other men, let alone to a young boy.
Is shows, I think, the depravity of our fallen state.
Amen, brother.
The
Amen.
the absolute sin that we are capable of thinking that we are doing good, and it's is so troubling to me. You know, I'm really fascinated by those periods in different countries where the church is forbidden. You know, I see that sword behind you, and know that Scotland had secret seminaries because mass was forbidden for so many years. The church was outlawed. So that's true in so many countries, and just the thought that what would I do in that situation? Would I go to the secret mass? Would I try to protect myself, and would I renounce? I think if someone started to cut my feet off, I'd be like, oh, whatever. I'll say whatever you want to say. But I hope that in that
Mm.
moment that my will would be subverted to God's will, and that I would have the courage to stand like he did. You know, they forced him to watch the execution of one of his friends. And he stood, and they thought that this was going to crack him. You know, a 13-year-old kid forced to watch someone die. And Jose Lito, shouted, I'll see you on the other side. Um, and that rallying cry of the Cristeros, Viva Cristo Rey, Viva Santa Maria de Guadalupe. You know, he shouted that
Oh,
as an
man, I got
encouragement.
goosebumps. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the idea of this, what this young man was put through. You know, I think what I was doing when I was 13, and this guy's on the line with Christ, as he says in the letter to his mother. They moved him back to his hometown, and the prison there was, ironically, the church that he had worshipped in as a
Mm.
child. It had been taken over by the government. It was filled with animals. It was filled with prisoners. It was a torture chamber. And the contempt that the government had for the faith is so clear in the way that they desecrated that church, and that they tortured this boy within it. There were a lot of efforts to try to free him. Ultimately, they weren't successful. Eventually, he had his feet flayed as a final ditch to get him to break. He wouldn't do it.
For people that don't know what you mean by feet flayed, if there's anybody wondering, I mean they would use something, and probably machetes in this case. I think in your article it mentions machetes in some context. Is this what they were
Yeah,
using, you think?
I think they use machetes here.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So
Yeah,
you're
and it's
cutting not only the skin, you're probably getting some tendons under just.
and they made him walk across town on I've never been to
Mm.
this town in Mexico, but I've been to a lot of small towns in Mexico, and so I know those cobblestone streets must have been agony.
Yeah.
Walk across town at gunpoint, took him to a cemetery. There was an open grave there. Again, they said, "Will you renounce Christ?" And he said no. And he said, "Viva Cristo Rey, Viva Santa Maria de Guadalupe." They pulled a gun, they put it to his head, and they killed him. And they thought they had won. But that's what, as we sit here and we listen to this terrible story, that's the gift we have because
Uh-huh.
we know the Mexican government didn't win. We know that those soldiers didn't win, that the real victor that day is San Jose. That is the victory in that martyrdom, to be a testament of faith, to stand as a model for young men all over the world, young women, of course, as well, all over the world, to stand as a role model in our moments of weakness, in our moments of fear, to think of him, to pray and ask him for his help, for
Yes.
his intercession, that we might have even an ounce of his courage.
I'll tell you, I'm wondering. We're looking at a couple of patron saints for the girls. It would be, I think we're settling on Saint Philomena, and probably Pierre Giorgio Frassati, and I think I'm going to add Joselita. As the patron saints of this apostolic movement for young people, because I think you're exactly right. It's the seed of martyrdom. And it did change, right? I mean, ultimately, the Cristeros did. I don't know history the Cristeros' history as well as I should, but they won out, didn't they? Or at least they got their rights to worship. Am I right, or
They
am I
did.
wrong with that?
They
Yeah.
did. 433, president repealed the Calais laws, and it was a slow process, but certainly, I was just in following the conclave. I didn't realize how late it was that the Vatican had restored diplomatic relations with Mexico, but it's one of the cardinals who was responsible for that. So I'm like, wow, that's within my lifetime. But that I think is also important too to remember that this story, while it's not within my lifetime, it was in the lifetime of my grandmother. It was in the lifetime of people that I knew. Um, that it happened in the near past. And it's happening right now. I think that's was so terrifying to me is it's happening in so many insidious ways all over the world. And it's happening in such brutal and awful ways in Nicaragua right now.
It is. It's amazing. Here's what happens. You hear this all the way from Exodus, where in the Passover we heard the Passover story, and in there it's so beautiful that the fathers were to pass this story on to their children, and this is what we stopped doing here in the United States and Western civilization as a whole. The baby boomers, which I'm part of, we stopped passing the story down to our children, and we just thought through osmosis. We got apathetic, all kinds of reasons, right? The sexual revolution. We talk about those things on our show all the time. But at the end of the day, Pope Benedict said this so well. He said, at first, when you take God out of your own heart, out of your family, out of the culture, out of education, and out of the country, everything seems like it's going around okay for a
Mm.
little while, and then he said, and then it ain't, and then it isn't, and that's true. At first, it takes a little while, but man, the evil starts to come in and fill those voids. We're really in a spiritual battle. I mean, sometimes I don't think we realize it until this last. And I think if there's any favor that the COVID exposed and all these things exposed for young people, as toxic as it was, as many anxiety, depression, all kinds of things they felt, I think it got so bad for them, the oppression, that they gave them an opportunity to say something's got to be better than this. And if
Yeah.
there's any gift in there, Avery, I'd like to get your take on that. That I think many of us are starting to really wake up to the reality of the intensity of the spiritual battle that we're in right now, that your story brought out so well. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I was talking to my nephew just this past weekend. He's getting his master's in Denmark. And
In Denmark.
yeah, and
I'm Danish, by the way,
oh, are you really?
but I think they lost their faith
I
too, didn't
believe they
they?
did.
Scandinavia, yeah.
I think so. And my mother asked him, are there lots of churches? And he said, no one's religious here. Maybe some old people, but the young people aren't. And I said, maybe controversially, in a family conversation, I said, oh no, they're religious. They belong to one of the most fundamental, intolerant religions, philosophies, orthodoxies in the world. It's called secular humanism.
Mm. What a wonderful way to put that. Say that again for our audience. It wasn't overly complicated, and that's why I like it. But the way you phrased that, can you remember what you just said?
Sure, it's secular humanism is a religion. It's an orthodoxy. It's intolerant. It's fundamentalist, and there's enormous punishment if you
Mm.
sin within it. If you stand against it, there's enormous punishment. It is. I have lots of friends from earlier in my life who I just try to avoid having any conversation that can take me to sort of the pillars of contemporary secular humanism: gender and abortion, and that sort of idea that we control life, that we control creation, that we control who we are. And it's a real religion that these people hold on to.
It is, and people don't realize that. That's why I like the way you phrased that so well, because we're this little tiny dot on the surface of a gas-fired planet that's revolving around a nuclear fireball 93 million miles away. The whole thing's exploding out the whole universe is exploding, and we think we got this handled. I mean, it's amazing, and you're exactly right. Just try to pray outside an abortion clinic in a secular humanistic environment, and you're going to find out just how violent it can become. Stand up against trans ideology, which is the most insane, unscientific thing you can imagine and impossible, right? From a biological, scientific
Yeah.
level, you would think that if they understood anything. But Jordan Peterson said, if you swallow that camel, Avery, there are no other camels that are going to be hard to swallow, that a man can become a woman just because he wishes it in his mind. But that's their dogma, and you
Yeah.
better not cross that line.
And I think in 20 years, podcasts like this will be having people on talking about the fact that they were made victims of child abuse and medical malpractice.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In fact, Avery, talk about it in general, right? This sexualization of our culture and everything that Joselito, whether he understood it or not, was seeking the truth, right? What is reality? What is the truth? And you're right. Secular humanism at the end, it doesn't really care about reality or the truth, does it? And
Well,
so many of our young people, and that's why I get excited about the ones that are standing up, because 90%, there was a study not too long ago that 90% of high school and college age people, young people, subscribe to moral relativism. 90%. So there is no truth, only my truth or your truth.
yeah,
You hear this all the time. But it just creates chaos, doesn't it?
it really does. And it ultimately, it's a sort of a hypocritical too,
Mm.
because there is a truth, right? There's no truth, but then when you push someone on the secular left or the secular humanist side, there is a truth, right? Their truth, and yours is not tolerated.
DEI and diversity to me is diversity of morality. There is no morality, right? It's anything that you say. Equity again is the easy. There's all kinds of ways to describe that, but this socialism and this state taking over is what they're really for, and this inclusion, this tolerance and inclusion. Long as you go along with the dogma, you're included. But
Correct.
man, are you thrown out quickly. Christianity, as you see all over the world, as it's being attacked, is the most tolerant. I mean, when I'm speaking of true Christianity, right, the true Catholic faith, we embrace other people that come in and even live around us. And if we don't agree, you don't take a machete to them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and man, you see the violence, don't you? The violence and the vitriol.
My social justice is based on love your neighbor. My social
What a
justice is
thought,
based,
huh? Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that Jesus was really clear that whatever we do for the least of these, we do to him. When you get much more complicated than that, you begin to move away from love, and you begin to move away from the power of love to make good in the world. I'm jealous in some ways that you have this wonderful ministry for young men and
Mm,
young women, because I wish that I had been hit on the head a lot sooner in my life. I wish that I
yeah.
had missed about 20 years of this madness because I was in it, and
So,
I
so,
wish.
so, so, but we've got about 5, 6, 7 minutes left. Tell us about that. You were in it. Where did that come from? Was that just growing up? And the other thing before you go, I got to hear about that back room you have going.
Sure.
You have quite a bit going on back there, and all of those things are part of Avery's personality, who you are, and so we want to get to know you a little bit more. So those two things, if you got a couple minutes for each one of them.
Sure. I'll say that you couldn't find a secular humanist point of view that I didn't support,
Mm.
and vehemently support. I
Now you
was
didn't
at,
get that growing up in Appalachia.
no, 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 no. Although I grew
You
up in
must have moved out to get that indoctrination, right? I mean,
I grew up in a college town, but I did. I went to college in Chicago and
oh, you
in
did.
Connecticut, and I worked in not for profits. I
We're from
worked.
Chicago, but that's why I say that.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I went to DePaul for a year. Funny, I went to a Catholic school for a year, but I didn't have anything to do with any Catholics. I had a Vincentian a priest for my creative writing class, and I have been terrified of Vincentians ever since. I now go to a Vincentian church, but I still get a little frightened when they come near me.
Jeez, I feel that
I,
way about the Jesuits, but
I'm
yeah.
sure. I'm sure. I was in it. I believed in the sexual revolution, and I believed in all of that.
Mm,
And I hurt myself, and I hurt other people, and I
mm.
preached things that now that I wish I hadn't preached.
We didn't know. We didn't know, Avery. When I speak to people, and I know this, I'm the oldest of five boys. We all fell for the lie for a while, and the church was changing too. After Vatican II, when I was a kid, I was born in the late 50s. When I was a kid, there was the Latin Mass, and then it all changed. And a few months later, a rock band came in, and it really rocked my soul. And I'll tell you why. Because we had the sexual revolution and all these cultural changes, and then at least if the church would have stayed the same, that would have gave me a certain foundational feel. Even if I walked away, I said, "Well, okay, well I can compare." But what I thought, Avery, I said, if the church can even change, maybe she doesn't have the truth, and so the church went through this period too. Not the church itself, not the beauty of the positive faith that comes down to us. That never changes. But there were a lot of cultural influences that came into the church, unfortunately. I love Vatican II, actually, and I love the documents, and I love what they were trying to do. But there was a hijacking there that took place at the same time. So our boats were rocked, Avery. I don't be too hard on yourself, brother, but you're right. We saw the carnage that we created in our lives,
Yeah.
didn't we?
And I think if I could talk to these young people about
Thank you.
the joy and the other side of that is a place of, it's not going to mean that every day is going to be rosy, but you're always going to know that you're not alone. You're not
Mm,
alone. And you're going to
mm,
be part of
that's
something
so
that
important.
that on the earth and its earthly manifestation is there for you all the time, and in its heavenly manifestation is of course overwhelmingly with you and for you always.
And Avery, and I know you feel this because I can sense it in your heart. When you say you're not alone, it's not just what's coming or the truths, but there's an actual encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, this is what's different. And when you meet him, and you take them in your heart, you meet this whole world of saints,
Yeah.
of people that you see around you, like Joselito. I mean, we get to know those people, and you think, well, how can you know them? They're not even here anymore. But I'm sorry, my friends, they're closer than we think, and they will help you. John Paul
Yeah.
II and our Blessed Mother, of course, we mentioned already. They're there for us, aren't they?
That's right. That's exactly right. And I feel when I talk to my Protestant friends, I always feel like, I'm sorry that your heaven is distant and far away because mine is right here.
Yes, it's
And
very true.
I talk to I talk to Oscar Romero and I talk to Joselito and I talk to Saint Francis and I have these friends now who guide me and lead me. And
Are any of those friends behind you there?
behind me, we have Saint Michael the Archangel back
Oh,
there, and we have the Sacred Heart, and there's all sorts of saints on this wall, prayer cards and such, and I have Joselito right
wow.
here with me.
Beautiful,
I headed to
beautiful.
Mexico for a month in the fall. I'm going to be learning more about San Rafael Guizar Valencia, who's a bishop from Jalapa in Veracruz. So those saints are always around. And I don't know, when I was a an atheist, prayer cards seemed so silly to me,
Mm.
and now they're like family photographs.
Yes, they are. That's and let's go out with this thought that I don't know why I'm bringing this up in the midst of your story. I could just sense it in you. I think when you're looking for eternity and earth to meet, this is the mass. This is the mass. This is the whole mass. When you go to mass and young people are coming back into the church, they're going to mass maybe sometimes for the first time, and on that altar, heaven and earth kiss. Avery, did you sense that when you came into the church, or did you
So
find that at least at some point? Huh?
absolutely, the first time I went to mass,
Mm.
from every time, and I love going to mass. I love traveling and going to mass. I love mass in languages I don't understand. I love being at mass and adoration, which was such
Mm.
an absolute shock to me. Went to the church. I don't remember why, and someone said it was adoration. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, but I'll go in. And to spend time so close to Jesus, to spend that time is a gift that I can't, there's nothing I could do to ever repay for that gift.
For young people that haven't been to adoration, Avery, and this is how we'll go out, speak to them a little bit about that, and also about the beauty of silence, if you don't mind, because I think that's one thing that they're finding, that when they get off those contraptions just for a little while, and it's a little weird at first for these young people because they're not used to silence. But what we try to do is we try to get them just to do a couple minutes at a time, and it's amazing how quickly some of them take to it.
It is extraordinary. Just this past fall, I was in Puebla, and I was in the cathedral, and there were a lot of tourists about, and it was
Mhm.
very noisy. That echoes. And I had gone into the little side adoration
Mm.
chapel. That moment of going there and kneeling, all of that noise, all of that bustle, just disappeared. It was just you could hear the breathing of the people there with you, and you could hear your own heart beating,
Mm.
and you could feast your eyes on the presence of our Lord, and to be that connected and to be removed from all the things that separate us from God, that draw us away from placing our focus, draw us away from that unceasing prayer that Paul calls for. All of those things just go away, and you're there in an immediate moment. That is, there's no Facebook messages to distract you. There are no New York Times alerts to pull you away. There's just you and what actually matters.
How beautiful. Hey, Avery, you're a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to link your article. Any other articles? I know I poked around a little bit at the Catholic Exchange. I also write for them, and for some other outlets too. Any other articles I should post of yours, or should they just look through the Catholic Exchange and see what you wrote? Because you've got a few things there.
Yeah, sure. I think the article about Blessed Sebastian de Aparicio, who was a Franciscan friar who died back in the early days of the conquest, and his body is incorruptible, and you can see it
Mm,
in Puebla.
mm.
His story is extraordinary,
Okay.
and it's such a great story about how you can change in your life.
Okay.
Life is a journey; it's not a static thing, but you're always on a pilgrimage. You're a pilgrim in life.
Yes, you are. We're on a journey. You know, that's the core thing of a man's heart, right? Where that life is going to be a journey,
Yeah,
that it's going to be a battle. Here's the sword, and finally we find out it's for beauty. It's for beauty, and the beauty, especially the beauty of love. One last thing, I think I remember Oscar Romero too. You had an article on Oscar
that's right.
Romero.
Yep.
That's another. That's got to be a great story to read too for young people too. It's got to be beautiful.
Definitely. And I think there's an upcoming one probably next week on Flannery O'Connor and why.
You son of a gun! I'm glad I met you. Hey, I'm gonna sign off. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye bye.